Most people think they know how royal inheritance works. They picture crowns, castles, and billion-pound headlines, and they assume the biggest winners are always the loudest names. Prince William, Prince Harry, the front row royals the world obsesses over. But the palace doesn't run on headlines. It runs on trust, access, and quiet decisions that never make the papers until it's too late to question them. And that's why this story feels so unsettling, because it isn't about the obvious heirs, it's about the granddaughter most people barely notice, Lady Louise Windsor. The royal who grew up away from the noise, kept out of constant press, living quietly enough that she could walk through ordinary life without being swallowed by the circus. She's the one who has been reported to work normal jobs, stay private, and avoid the spotlight. The last person you'd expect to be at the center of a royal inheritance whisper. But what if the quietest grandchild is the safest choice? What if, in Queen Elizabeth's final years, when the family was under pressure and the public drama never stopped, she wasn't rewarding loudness, she was rewarding steadiness? And what if those private choices signaled something deeper? Not just about who the Queen loved, but about who she trusted. Because here's the part that makes royal watchers sit up. Multiple reports and long-running palace chatter suggest that certain personal items, personal decisions, and personal access were quietly placed in the hands of people the Queen believed would protect her legacy. And those choices may not have pleased everyone around the throne, especially not the branch of the family that arrived later, with new titles, new dynamics, and children who were close, but never quite inside in the same way. So tonight we're following one thread: Lady Louise, the granddaughter the public barely talks about, and the granddaughter some royal commentators believe may have quietly received more meaning, more symbolic inheritance, and more private favor than anyone expected, not because she demanded it, but because she never did. Stay with me, because once you see the pattern, the story changes. This isn't just about who got what. It's about what the Queen was trying to protect and who she believed was capable of protecting it. If you enjoy royal stories told with respect, focusing on what's publicly known, what's been reported, and why the details matter, we don't do cheap panic here. We do careful storytelling, and we let the evidence and the patterns speak. Now let's start where this bond truly begins. Lady Louise has always felt different from the more visible royals. While other young royals were regularly photographed, shaped into public symbols, and placed into the narrative of the modern monarchy, Louise largely stayed outside it. That wasn't an accident. It's been part of how Prince Edward and Sophie raised their children, quieter, more protected, less exposed. And in a family like this, that kind of upbringing does something powerful. It creates a person who can be trusted around private life. Someone who isn't performing, isn't competing, isn't chasing the moment. Someone who can walk into a royal room and not turn it into a headline. That matters. Because when royal insiders talk about favor, they rarely mean obvious money. They mean access. They mean the private side of a monarch. They mean the moments no one sees. The ones that shape the decisions that do end up written into wills, gifts, and private arrangements. Louise's early story is often described as dramatic and frightening. She was born in November 2003 in an emergency situation that reportedly worried the family deeply. Those kinds of beginnings can create a protective bond that lasts for years, especially in grandparents who carry a lifetime of discipline but still feel fear the same way any family does. Louise also faced childhood challenges that were publicly discussed over the years, including vision issues that required treatment. And while the public saw the Queen as a figure of calm power, the people closest to her have long suggested she had a deeply human side that only appeared around children and private family moments, especially around the youngest ones. That's why Louise, being the youngest granddaughter, separated in age from older cousins, mattered. It arrived at a moment when Elizabeth was older, less interested in spectacle, and more drawn to what she couldn't buy: quiet, normal warmth. And the royal household has long been built on one hidden truth: the Queen gave her real self to very few people. Some royal journalists and longtime observers have described the Queen's affection for Louise and her brother James as unusually gentle, with stories of ordinary time together away from the cameras. Those small moments might sound insignificant, until you remember who we're talking about. In this family, ordinary time is rare, and rarity creates value. Now we get to the moment the public actually watched, Prince Philip's funeral in April 2021. The images were controlled, solemn, historic, but the details told a private story. The carriage, the driving kit, the ponies, the symbols of a passion Philip built late in life and carried into old age. It wasn't just a hobby. Carriage driving became Philip's identity after polo ended, and he pursued it seriously for decades. What makes this relevant to Louise is that Philip didn't just like the sport. He taught it. Carefully. Personally, he spent time with Louise, training her, building skill, building confidence, building something that couldn't be faked. And by all public indications, Louise didn't treat it like a cute royal pastime, she treated it like a discipline. Her mother Sophie has spoken publicly about Louise having a natural ability for it, and Louise has appeared in carriage driving contexts over the years that reinforce the idea this wasn't symbolic, it was real. So when reporting and royal coverage indicated that Louise received Philip's carriage driving legacy and the items tied to it, the emotional meaning was louder than any cash number. Because it wasn't inheritance as money, it was inheritance as identity. Philip chose her for what he cherished most. And that kind of choice in a royal family is never random. It's a declaration of trust. Here's where the story tightens. Queen Elizabeth didn't just lose her husband. She lost her lifelong partner, the person who lived inside the institution with her, who understood the strain, who carried the weight privately. After his death, anything connected to Philip carried extra emotional gravity. So when Louise continued in that world, the carriage driving, the discipline, the tradition, it wasn't just a nice family detail. It was continuity. It was the kind of steadiness Elizabeth valued above almost everything else. That's why the Louise question got louder in royal watcher circles. If Philip trusted Louise with what mattered most to him, and the Queen treasured Louise's quiet presence, what else might Elizabeth have privately positioned? Not necessarily in headlines, but in meaning. Because in monarchies, symbolic inheritance is often more revealing than financial inheritance. It tells you who was trusted to carry the family's real story, not the public one. To understand why people even speculate about inheritance tension, you have to separate two things the public constantly mixes up: the monarchy's institutional assets versus the late Queen's personal property. The Crown Estate, the massive collection of properties and assets connected to the institution, isn't the Queen's personal bank account. It's managed separately, and it passes with the roll. That's why people can talk about enormous royal wealth without it being something a monarch can simply hand to whoever they like. But monarchs do have personal wealth and personal property as well, and that is where choices matter. Personal jewelry, personal collections, personal estates historically held as private property, personal items with emotional and historical meaning. Those are the things a monarch can direct, through gifts, arrangements, or private decisions, and those choices are often where the real family friction narratives begin. This is also where a lot of tabloid reporting enters the picture. Some outlets have claimed the Queen made very specific decisions about personal pieces and personal items, favoring certain individuals. Those claims are not always verifiable, and they should be treated cautiously, but they persist because they fit a pattern royal families have always had: private preference expressed through private gifts. Now we arrive at the part competitors love because it's combustible: jewelry, legacy, and resentment. Some tabloid-style reporting has suggested that Catherine, Princess of Wales, was a major recipient of personal jewelry and symbolic items tied to Elizabeth's private collection, and that this reflected the closeness Elizabeth felt toward Catherine in later years. Again, the exact figures thrown around online vary wildly and are often exaggerated, but the narrative is consistent. Catherine was seen as family core, and the Queen's private choices may have reflected that. And once Catherine is framed that way, the story automatically pulls in Queen Camilla, not as a villain, but as the person the internet loves to position as outside the original circle. Camilla's children are frequently discussed in royal commentary as being near the crown but not born into it, present but not central, invited but not fully inside the inheritance story of the Windsor line. That's where Louise becomes important again, because Louise represents something Elizabeth may have valued, in contrast to the modern royal storm: quiet loyalty, low drama, and continuity without performance. If the Queen's private choices did signal preference, then Louise fits the emotional logic of why. And if you're wondering why audiences can't stop clicking stories like this, it's because it pushes one deeply human question. When a family is under pressure, who gets the private love, and who only gets the public formality? So here's the honest conclusion that makes this story work, without needing wild, unverifiable claims. Lady Louise may not be the richest royal. She may not be the most powerful. She may not be the most visible. But she may be something else entirely. A quiet symbol of who Elizabeth trusted when the noise got too loud. Because in the end, the most important inheritance isn't always the largest check. It's the legacy you're trusted to carry without turning it into a spectacle. It's the private objects that matter because they came with private permission. It's the fact that, while the world watched the loudest stories, the Queen may have been quietly strengthening the people she believed would protect the institution's soul. And that's what makes Louise so fascinating. She doesn't look like an inheritance headline. She looks like the person a monarch would choose when they're tired of headlines. For years, the public has been trained to look at the royal family like a spotlight. Whoever stands in the center must be the one with the most power, the most privilege, and the biggest inheritance. William and Harry. The headlines. The drama. The main characters of the monarchy. But inside Windsor, inheritance isn't only about money. It's about trust. It's about who can be relied upon when the family is under pressure and who can carry a legacy without turning it into a spectacle. And that's why this story keeps resurfacing, even though the palace would rather it didn't. Because while the world argued about the obvious heirs, another branch of the family was being quietly elevated: Edward and Sophie's household. The calm corner of the royal family. The one that didn't explode into scandals every time the newspapers needed a front page. The one that kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept protecting the institution's image without demanding applause. And at the center of that quiet rise is someone most people still don't truly know. Lady Louise Windsor, the granddaughter who grew up with minimal fuss, who has lived so normally at times that she could work an ordinary job, study quietly, and avoid the royal circus that swallows other young royals whole. Yet royal watchers have long suspected something, that the late Queen's private favor, the kind that's never written in a press release, leaned toward the people who made her life calmer, not louder. So here's the question that hooks this entire video. What if Lady Louise, the quietest grandchild, is actually positioned to benefit the most from the Queen's private legacy? Not because she demanded it, but because she never did. And if that's even partly true, what does it say about where Queen Elizabeth's loyalties really sat in her final years, and why some people inside the palace may not have been thrilled by it? Because once you understand how Edward and Sophie were quietly trusted, and how Louise's life has been shaped around discipline rather than drama, a different picture emerges, one that's less about jealousy and more about something the monarchy values above everything: stability. Stay with me, because the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. This isn't a random inheritance rumor. It's a story about who the Queen believed would protect the future of the institution, and who she believed might not. If you enjoy royal stories told with respect, focusing on public facts, credible reporting context, and why certain family dynamics matter, please subscribe. No hysteria, no cheap panic, just calm storytelling and the details that most people miss. Now let's unfold this properly, in order, starting with the reason Edward and Sophie's family was trusted in the first place. If you look at Queen Elizabeth's 4 children, you see 4 very different public journeys, and the monarchy felt every one of them. Charles lived under a lifetime of tabloid scrutiny. Andrew became a long-term crisis for the institution. Anne was fiercely independent and never played the game for popularity. But Edward, the youngest, built something the Queen treasured deeply in her later years: a stable, low-drama household that never competed with the crown for attention. That stability wasn't just about Edward, it was also about Sophie, now the Duchess of Edinburgh, who has often been described by royal observers as one of the most dependable working royals of her generation. She stepped into the role without trying to outshine it. She didn't chase celebrity, she didn't turn royal life into a brand. And the Queen, by all credible accounts of her character, valued two things above almost everything: discretion and duty. Sophie has supported a wide range of patronages over the years, and she built a reputation inside royal circles for being reliable. The kind of person who shows up, does the work, and doesn't leak the private moments. And when you're Queen Elizabeth in the final decades of her reign, reliability becomes priceless. It isn't glamorous, but it holds the building up. There's a story that captures this dynamic perfectly, the one where a young Louise comes home confused and says something along the lines of, "Mummy, people keep telling me Grandma is the Queen." And when Sophie asks how that makes her feel, Louise simply doesn't understand the fuss, because to her, Elizabeth isn't an institution, she's just Grandma. That's the kind of normality the Queen rarely got. And it's the kind of normality she protected fiercely. Edward and Sophie's home at Bagshot Park, often described as a warm, private base away from the constant theater of palace life, represented something the Queen didn't often experience publicly: a family environment that felt uncomplicated. No constant media storms, no public warfare, just routine, affection, and structure. And in royal families, when you provide that kind of emotional shelter to the monarch, you don't just become liked, you become trusted. That trust became visible in a symbolic way in 2023 when King Charles granted Edward the title of Duke of Edinburgh, a move many interpreted as recognition that Edward had carried himself with loyalty and steadiness over decades. Titles are never just titles in this institution. They are signals. And that signal said, "This branch is safe." Now, once a branch is seen as safe, the next question becomes inevitable. What does safe earn behind closed doors? Not in headlines, but in private legacy. Lady Louise's story is compelling precisely because it is not flashy. While her cousins were trapped in global narratives, one as future king, one as the royal rebel, Louise was allowed to become something rare in that family, a young adult with space to grow. Her education path reflects that: school near Windsor, then further study, then university, including her move to the University of St. Andrews, a place already loaded with royal symbolism because it's where William and Catherine famously met. People noticed that detail not because it proved anything, but because royal families repeat patterns when they trust the environment.